For a week after the commission of the impious and profane of the feigns of asking for more, Oliver remained a close prisoner in the dark and solitary room to which he had been consigned by the wisdom and mercy of the bird. It appears, at first sight, not unreasonable to suppose that if we had entertained a becoming feeling of respect for the prediction of the gentleman in the white waistcoat, he would have established an such individual's prophetic character, once and forever, by tying one end of his pocket handkerchief to a hook in the wall, and attaching himself to the other. To the performance of this feat, however, there was one obstacle, namely, that pocket handkerchief, being decided articles of luxury, had been, for all future times and ages, removed from the nose of paupers by the express order of the bird, in council assembled, solemnly given and pronounced under their hands and seals. There was a still greater obstacle in Oliver's youth and childishness. He only cried bitterly all day, and then the small night came on, spread his little hand before his eyes to shut out the darkness, and, crouching in the corner, tried to sleep, ever and anon waking a start and tremble, and drawing himself closer and closer to the wall, as if to feel even its cool hard surface where a protection and gloom and loneliness which surrounded him. Let it not be supposed by enemies of system that, during the period of his solitary incarceration, Oliver was denied the benefit of exercise, the pleasure of society, and the advantage of religious consolations. As for exercise, it was night school weather, and he was allowed to perform this absolution every morning under the palm, in a stone yard, in the presence of Mr. Bumble, who prevented his catching cold and causing tingling sensation to perfect his frame, his repeated application of the cane. As for society, he was carried every other day into the hall where he boy dined, and their sociable flock as a public warning and example. And so far from being denied this advantage of religious consolation, he was kicked into the same apartment every evening at prayer time, and there permitted to listen to, and console his mind with, a general supplication of the boys, containing a special clause, therein inserted by authority of the bird, in which they entered to be made good, virtuous, content, and obedient, and to be guarded from the sins and vice of Oliver Twice, whom the supplication distinctly set forth to be under the exclusive patronage and protection of the power of weakness, and an article direct from the manufactory of the very devil himself. It chanced one morning, while Oliver's affairs were in his auspicious and comfortable state, that Mr. Gamfield, chimney sweep, went his way down High Street, deeply cogitating is his mind his ways and means of paying certain areas of rent, for which his landlord had become rather pressing. Mr. Gamfield's most sanguine estimate of his finance could not raise them within full £5 of the desired amount, and, in a species of arithmetical desperation, he was alternately cudgeling his brains and his donkey, when passing the workhouse. His eyes encouraged the bill on the gate.
"Well," said Mr. Gamfield to the donkey. The donkey was instead a profound abstraction, wondering Probably, whether he was destined to be regaled with a cabbage stalk or two when he had disposed of the two sacks of the suit with which the little cart was laden. So, without noticing the word of command, he jogged onward. Mr. Gamfield grew a fierce imprecation on the donkey generally, but more particular on his ass, and, running after him, bestowed a blow on his head, which will inevitably have beaten in any school but any donkey's. Then, catching hold on the bridle, he gave his jaw a sharp wrench, by way of the gentle reminder that he was not his own master, and by this means turned him round.
He then gave him another blow on the head, just to stun him till he came back again. Having completed this arrangement, he walked up to the gate to read the bill. The gentleman with the white waistcoat was standing at the gate with his hands behind him. After having delivered himself of some profound sentiments in the boardroom, having witnessed the little dispute between Mr. Gamfield and the donkey, he smiled jocosely when that person came up to read the bill, for he saw at once of Mr. Gamfield was exactly the sort of Master Oliver twice want. Mr. Gamfield smiled, too, as he perused the document, for £5 was just the sum he had been wishing for, and as to the boy with which it was encumbered, Mr. Gamfield, knowing what the dietary of the workhouse was, well knew he would be a nice small pattern, just the very thing for register stuff. So he spelled the bill out again, from the beginning to end, and then, tossing his fur cap in token of humility, across the gentleman in the white waistcoat. "This here boy, sir, what the parish want to practice," said Mr. Gamfield. "My man," said the gentleman in the white waistcoat with a condescending smile. "What of him?" "If the parish would like him to learn a right pleasant trade, in a good, spectable, simply sweeping business," said Mr. Gamfield, "I once apprentice and I'm ready to take him." "Walk in," said the gentleman in the white waistcoat, Mr. Gamfield having lingered behind, to give the donkey another blow on the head, and another wrench on the jaw, as a caution not to run away in his absence. Followed the gentleman with the white waistcoat into the room where Oliver had first sent him. "It's a nasty trade," said Mr. Limbkins, when Gamfield had again stated his wish. "Young boys have been smart in chimneys before now," said another gentleman. "That's a cause they dump the straw of war they lit it in the chimney to make 'em come down again," said Gamfield. "That's all smoke, and no blaze. Very smoke ain't no use at all in making a boy come down, for it only sends him to sleep, and that's what he likes. Boy is very obstinate and very lazy, gentlemen, and there is nothing like a good hot place to make 'em come down fit round. It's human too, gentlemen, a cause, even if they stuck in the chimney. Roasting their feet makes 'em struggle to extricate themselves." The gentleman in the white waistcoat appeared very much amused by this explanation, but his mirth was speedily checked by a look from Mr. Limbkins. The board they proceeded to converse among themselves for a few minutes, but in so low a tone that he was saving off expenditure. Look well in the account. Have a print report published. Were alone audible. This only chance to be heard, indeed, or account of their being very frequently repeated with great emphasis. At length, the whispered cases, and the members of the board, having resumed their seats and their solemnity, Mr. Limbkins said, "We have considered your proposition, and we don't approve of it." "Not at all," said the gentleman in the white waistcoat. "Decidedly not," added the other members. As Mr. Gamfield did happen to labor under the slight imputation of the having bruised 3 or 4 boys to death already, it occurred to him that the board had, perhaps, in some unaccountable freak, taken it into their heads that this extraneous circumstance ought to influence their proceeding. It was very unlike that general mode of doing business. If they had, but still, as he had no particular wish to revise the rumor, he twisted his cap in his hands, and walked slowly from the table. "So you won't let me have him, gentlemen?" said Mr. Gamfield, pausing near the door. "No," replied Mr. Limbkins, at last, "as it's nasty business, we think you ought to take something less than the premium we offered." Mr. Gamfield can't break the nest. With a quick step, he returned to the table and said, "What will you give, gentlemen? Come, don't be too hard on a pure man. What will you give?" "I should say £3.10 was plenty," said Mr. Limbkins. "10 shillings too much," said the gentleman in the white waistcoat. "Come," said Gamfield, "say your pound, gentlemen. Say £4, and you have got right of him for good and all." "There, £3.10, repeated Mr. Limbkins firmly. "Come, I will split the difference, gentlemen," urged Gamfield. £3.15. "Not a farthing more," was the firm reply of the Mr. Limbkins. "You are desperate hard upon me, gentlemen," said Mr. Gamfield, wavering. "Pooh, pooh, nonsense," said the gentleman in the white waistcoat. "He behaved with nothing at all, as a premium. Take him, you silly fellow. He's just the boy for you. He wants the sick now and then. I will do him good, and his board need come very expensive, for there has not been overfed since the was born. Ha ha ha." Mr. Gamfield gave an arch look and the face round on the table, and observing a smile on all of them, gradually broke into a smile himself. The bargain was made. Mr. Bumble was at once instruction that Oliver twice and his indentures were to be conveyed become the magistrate for signature and approval that very afternoon. In pursuance of this determination, little Oliver, to his excessive astonishment, was released from bondage and ordered to put himself into the clean shirt. And ordered to put himself into the clean shirt. He had hardly achieved this very unusual gymnastic performance when Mr. Bumble brought him, with his own hands, a basin of gruel and the holiday allowance of 2 ounces and quarter of bread. At this tremendous sight, Oliver began to cry very piteously, thinking, not unnaturally, that the bird must have determined to kill him for some useful purpose, or they never would have begun to fatten him up in that way. Don't make your eyes red, Oliver, but eat your food and thankful, said Mr. Bumble, in a tone impressive capacity. You are going to be made apprentice of Oliver. Apprentice, sir, sighed the child, trembling. Yes, Oliver, said Mr. Bumble. The kind and blessed gentleman which is so many parents to you, Oliver, when you have none of your own, are going to apprentice you, and to set you up in life, and make a man of you. I'll took the expense to the parish in £3.10. £3.10, Oliver, 70 shillings, 146 pence, and all for a naughty orphan which nobody can love.